I told you guys, I said I wasn't going to use that term. So many YouTubers call everybody guys. I told everybody that I wasn't going to, that I was going to talk about my story. We talked on Monday about times where, loving through anger, but there may be times where there are relationships that you need to get out of. And one of those times is when there is spousal abuse. And I alluded to you that I was a kid who grew up in a house that had spousal abuse. My father was abusive to my mother and to me, physically abusive, and all the things that come with that. Now, I didn't know at the time that he had a drug abuse problem, that he had a substance abuse problem. At the time, I knew that he was an alcoholic, but as far as the other things go, some of the other things go, I didn't know about. But what I do know about is that I understand abused spouse syndrome. I also understand abused kid syndrome too, because there isn't any way that the abuser just affects the spouse if there are children in the house. Everybody is subject to that abuse. Everybody is subject to that tension. Everybody is subject to the horribleness that all that is. And my story is, I don't know if it's typical. I don't know. I really don't know what a lot of other people who had similar things happen to them have gone through. I really don't know. Maybe you guys can comment below if you've been in a similar situation or know about similar situations. I'm not originally from Tampa, Florida, although I love being here. I've been here since I was 7. We used to live in Newark, New Jersey. Or Newark. I was born in Newark. We lived in Passaic and East Orange and, all around there, but basically Newark. We left when we moved down here. We were living in East Orange, for those of you who know that area. During the summer of 1968, while they were trying to burn Newark down. So I remember, sort of like you remember when you're that age, when you're 4 or 5, particular incidents. And and the saddest part is that I only remember basically incidents of the violence that because I guess, oh dear, traffic is bad. I guess because they were so shocking to me as a 5-year-old. I remember shouting and screaming, cursing, and hitting and screaming and crying for my mother when I was that age. Things breaking, things being thrown. That's the kind of stuff that apparently, I'm 57 now, sticks with you. And hang on a second, somebody's doing something stupid. Okay. The kind of stuff that sticks with you. It's really, really, and it's kind of stuff that sticks in your brain as a little kid. We moved to Florida. It's interesting how we moved to Florida. My mom and I used to visit my grandmother, her mother, and we would come down in the summertime on a train. The Champion was the name of the train, and this is for Amtrak. This is Seaboard Coastline used to have a before they gave up their passenger service to the government. They used to have a train service, and then there was like the Meteor that ran that line, and the Champion. We would ride down on the Champion and stay a couple of weeks, and then go back. This particular summer, we came down, and it was during the Newark riots. And during the riots were on TV, of course, on the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite every night. And I was like noticing places on the TV that were close to where we lived, and it seemed like all hell was breaking loose there, because it was. So we waited and waited and waited and waited to see if there was going to be time that that will be okay to go back, for things to calm down. Well, what happened was we ended up in school. I ended up in school here because August came, and school started, and they put me in school. So the next thing I know, as a 7-year-old, my mom's telling me that we're going to move, and we're moving in here. And what do you think of as a 7-year-old? What about my toys? I'm an only child. We weren't rich, but I was an only child. So as an only child, you got a bunch of stuff, right? So, and she said, well, your dad will pack up as much as he can in the car and bring what he can. I was not a happy camper at 7. I was, things were going to be different. I was leaving my friends, and I was leaving all my stuff, everything I knew as a 7-year-old, with no warning or no planning. Kind of sucked. So, my dad shows up in the 56 Dodge, and I'm not joking, 56 Dodge, and we stayed with my grandparents for a while. Now, even the time that we stayed with my grandparents, there were bouts of drinking and swearing and violence, people threatening to get firearms after each other. It was hell. It was awful. And I remember that as a youngster. And I remember asking my mom, when could we go home? And she said, we are home. Next thing I knew, we were getting a house. We were moving out of my grandparents' house, and we were getting a house. And the house was in a place called Progress Village, here in here in the Tampa Bay area. So we were moving into a house, our own house for the first time. Because if you're from up north, what you know is that a lot of times there are houses that are multi-family houses. Like the owners live on the first floor, and they rent out the second floor. And the second floor is really a house. It's not small like an apartment. It's big like a house. It's the same size as the house downstairs. But so we did that. We moved to Progress Village. My parents bought a house. The house was $10,000. $10,000. Wow. I think their mortgage was less than $100 a month. And for a while, things seemed to be okay. I don't remember violence. And then there started to be a time where there was more and more violence. There was more and more screaming and yelling. There was more and more drinking. There was more and more. Until one night. This is the night that changed everything. My dad came home ostensibly from work or somewhere. I don't know where he was. And I was in bed I think my mom was in bed already, and then it was, I don't know, it was 10 or 11 o'clock at night. I was 11 or 12, and there was all sorts of just crashing and just commotion coming out of their room. Things breaking, lamps going, you know what I mean? It was just all hell break loose in their room. And he was screaming and cussing, and I could hear that he was hitting her. I could hear he was hitting her. He was threatening her. So I got up and knocked on their door. I just wanted them to stop. And he came out. And he confronted me. And I could tell that I could look past him and see their room was a mess. There was, all the crap was off the dresser on the floor. The nightstand was turned over. It was all hell broke loose. And he confronted me. And he told me to go back in my room. So I'm backing up. I remember backing up all the way to my bed. And he's screaming at me and yelling at me, and my mother saying, "Leave him alone." It was like a movie. It was like a horror movie, is what it was like. And at some point, he backhanded me. And I remember flying over my bed. It's the first time that he hit me with his hand. My father had never... See, this is the crazy part about all this. My father had never spanked me. Every spanking I got from my mother. My father had never spanked me. Not even a swat on the butt I can remember. To this day. So, in any case, I crawled back. I remember crawling back over the bed, and I wasn't. The thing is, I wasn't hurt. I wasn't hurt. I remember crawling back over the bed, and he had left my room and walked into the kitchen. And I'd come out into the living room, and it was really weird. And now I understand what paranoid schizophrenia looks like, up close and personal. He seemed to be in an instant, and I am not lying to you, in an instant, he seemed to be entirely different, entirely okay. He was my dad again. And he said he was just tired, and he needed to get some rest, and I needed to get some rest, and then he said, "Go ahead, go back to your room, go to bed." And he said, and see, this is the weird part. And he said to me, "Skedaddle," which he used to say. I don't use that word to this day, and I don't use that word for because it brings back all the stuff from what happened next. I went back to my room. I was too scared and too nervous to lay down. So I went back in my room, and I remember sitting on my bed, and then there was noise in my parents' bedroom again, and I got up and I ran to the kitchen. And as I'm standing in the kitchen, my dad came out first from their bedroom, and then my mom followed him. And they were standing, and I remember them standing there. The light was on in the kitchen, the light wasn't on in the living room. And I know they were standing there. And she had her house coat on. Y'all know about house coats, right? She had her house coat on. And then there was a gunshot. And I ran. I ran out of the house. And I ran next door to get help. I didn't really know what had happened. And as I was running out, I could hear my dad yell, "Junior, you could come back here." That wasn't going to happen. So I ran out of the house. I ran next door and I banged on the door. Tried to get the neighbors to help. And I told them that my dad had shot my mom. And they called the police. I didn't call the police. Remember, there were no cell phones or anything. So they called 911 or whatever. And I was over at their house as the police came. So the police came, and I eventually walked next door back to the house, and one of the police officers asked me who I was, and I told him who I was, and I asked, "How's my mom?" And he said, "The ambulance is coming to get your mother." And then he asked me what happened. So I told him what happened, and then he asked me, "Well, where's the gun?" I didn't have any idea where the gun was. Remember, I told him the same story I told you. I didn't have any idea where the gun was. I was under the impression that he had chased me out the back door, or at least gone that far, and maybe tossed the gun in the backyard. But they said they couldn't find it. I don't know. I have any idea where the gun was. About that time, the paramedics had come, and they were taking my mother. They had her on the stretcher. They were taking her to the ambulance. And I didn't see her. I don't remember seeing her. But I do remember hearing her. And I remember hearing her moan, "I'm dying." I do remember that. And I do remember her crying out when she looked over and saw that the police were handcuffing my father and stuffing him in the police car. That made her upset, but the neighbors just took me in their house. As my mom left in the ambulance, I didn't go with anybody, and of course, they took my father to jail. For the evening, they took him to jail. I think my grandparents came and got me, because obviously I was in shock. I think my grandparents came and got me, and I spent the night with them. And ended up, when he got out, yes, he got out. And you're asking, well, how the hell did he get out? Did he just shoot somebody? He got out. And he came and got me from my grandparents. I don't know. Somebody, I guess he figured out where I was. And we went back home. We went back to the house. And we would visit my mom in the hospital. and she got better. I learned during that experience what a colostomy bag is. She had an abdominal wound. She'd been shot in the abdomen. And had to poop in a bag. And obviously she was never the same after that. That didn't kill her, but it started the process. And you would have thought that would be enough, right? It wasn't. Their marriage lasted maybe, golly, 15 more years. With bouts of violence in between. We eventually lost the house. They lost the house. I didn't lose the house. I was a kid. They eventually lost the house, and we had to go back for a while and live with my grandparents. And then we lived in an apartment. I think it was a government subsidized deal. I'm just trying to piece all that together. I don't know. I was a kid. I don't know. All I knew is that we live here now. This is where we live. And I had a long walk to the bus stop to go to school. And then we didn't live there. And then we didn't live there anymore. Then we lived in a house with some other people. Rooming house. I was in the front bedroom, and my parents were in the back of the house, in what used to be a porch that they had made into a bedroom, but it was still very much a porch. And we stayed there for more than a year, where there was a lot of drinking, there was a lot of violence, there was a lot of cursing and screaming and yelling and violent behavior. The wife of this man was insane, really. So it was a horrific environment. But they were still married. And living situations after that changed a couple of times. A number of times. Where after I had gone away to school, we were living in my mother and I were living in another rooming house, not far from where my grandfather lived. My grandmother had passed away, and we were living there for all the time that I was at community college. And I left there and went to Florida State. And during that time, there was actually a divorce. It's funny. During that time, my dad was all like, "Well, you ain't gonna get no money from me." I'm like, "Negro, you ain't got no money. You got nothing. Zero." He never got help for his substance abuse. My mother never got help for her problems that kept her in that situation. I think the only way that she had enough courage to actually file for divorce is that I wasn't living there anymore, that it wasn't going to affect me negatively, because I wasn't living there anymore. I think that's the only reason that she had courage enough to do it. So when women don't leave, I tell you what, I understand. I get it. I know why. I get it. Because even as bad as it can get, the unknown is scarier. And after they hurt you the way that my father hurt my mother, she was so broken down in her spirit. Because for us, there was no church, there was no pastor, there was no congregation, there was no support system, really. So we were very much on our own. There was nothing else. There was nothing. So when I hear that young people are in abusive situations, I'm the guy who said, I'm the guy in every other aspect of life that says, work it out, make it happen, you can do it. But I'll tell you, I'm going to tell you this, ladies, this is for you, and this is for your daughters. If he hits you, he will kill you. If he hits you, he will kill you. Save yourselves. Relationships, marriages come back from infidelity. It's tough. We talked about that on the show Monday. It's tough. Relationships come back from infidelity. Relationships can't come back if one of you is murdered. And the fallout on your children is devastating. Listen to what I'm telling you. If he hits you, he will kill you. If he hits you, get out. Tell everybody. Tell everybody you know. Tell the police. Tell his parents. Tell your parents. Tell everybody you know. If you're a girl and you're in school, tell your teachers. Tell your principals. Tell your counselors. Tell everybody. Tell your friends. Tell everybody you know. And get out. I'm going to say it one more time before I go. If he hits you, he will kill you. Some would say it was the grace of God that kept my father from murdering my mother right in front of me. Right in front of me. So I would have lost my mother in 72 as opposed to losing her in 83. Folks, that's my story. Got to get out here and make room for somebody else. Until we see you again, go out there and learn something, love somebody, and for goodness sakes, y'all take care of yourself. Peace.